Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. With summertime in New York City comes lots of fun. Sit back, keep cool, and enjoy Italics' look at what's going on.
I've got you under my skin.
We're at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center for the Sinatra, an American Icon exhibit. We're here with Anthony Tamburri, who will interview Charles Granata, author, producer, and expert on Sinatra.
Charles, welcome to Italics.
Thank you for having me today, and what a great place to be. This amazing exhibit of Frank Sinatra's life and career. It's incredible here at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts.
You have published a book on Sinatra, Sessions with Sinatra.
I have.
Frank Sinatra and the Art of Recording.
Yes.
The book has been praised by Publishers Weekly and Kirkus Reviews. And they really had some great things to say about you, but they talk about you having access to a sort of gold mine of recordings.
A treasure trove of really music history and a snapshot of the golden age of pop music in the 20th century. And, you know, for my books, I've interviewed hundreds of musicians and songwriters and producers and engineers and orchestrators, all kinds of people in the business that worked with Frank Sinatra on his recordings, on his films, on his television and radio programs. And every one of them, when you talk about the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, they really believe that that was the golden age for pop music. And they're right. I mean, that was really the era of the Great American Songbook when we were listening to Gershwin and Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein and Rodgers and Hart, and we had performers like Frank Sinatra.
So let's put Sinatra's popularity when he was younger in perspective. So today we're talking about 50 years of the Beatles, the British invasion, et cetera, right? And I remember my mother would never get too excited over the reactions of the young women towards the Beatles because she said the same thing happened when Frank Sinatra was on the scene in the 40s.
Yeah, there you have it. Frank Sinatra was truly the first American teen idol. And it's really interesting, you know, Quincy Jones has said this a number of times, but you can really break up our musical history in the 20th century, which is really where it burgeoned. That's where music really became important and integrated in our culture. But you can really break it up by decades. So in the 1940s, it's Frank Sinatra. In the 1950s, it's Elvis. In the 60s, it's the Beatles. The 70s were the kind of disco rock era. And then the 80s was Michael Jackson. And there you have a big part of our music heritage, you know, and it's rooted in these 6 or 7 people and groups, and that's pretty amazing. But Frank was number one. He was the first person that anyone made that kind of fuss over, you know, really went crazy for. And I think in a lot of ways it's because he was really the first multimedia superstar. Sinatra was young, charming, looked great, sounded phenomenal, and appealed to these young girls whose boyfriends were at war. So, you know, he became this icon almost instantaneously in the 1940s. And it was, I think, a confluence of all those circumstances. The fact that, you know, also the rise of radio and television in the 40s, and the fact that he went to Hollywood so soon after he hit his initial success.
And he had a TV show in 1950
he
to
did.
52.
I think that's real nice of you, Bob, and since you did apologize, I won't use the joke I brought about you.
You had a joke about me?
Yes, I was going to say that the reason that you're such a relaxed comedian is because when you sit down, so much comes to rest.
He was one of the first variety shows on TV.
Correct. Which still is an important milestone because there were songs that Frank Sinatra sang on the radio and, as we're talking about, on that CBS television show that he never sang again. So, you know, going back to those early films of those TV shows from 1950 and 51 is really amazing because there's unheard Sinatra on there.
Look down the lonesome road before you travel on.
That's always a delight, when you can find a standard that Frank never sang or hadn't covered before.
And the other thing about your comment about him being one of the first, if not the first, multimedia artist, television, and then soon thereafter he's in the movies.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
so he's singing, radio,
right.
television, and the movies.
By 1950, Frank had really conquered every medium. He was on records, he was on the radio, he was on television, and most of all, he was on the big screen. So, the people who couldn't get to Broadway could see Frank Sinatra in a film. They could go, whether they lived in Kansas or Iowa or North Dakota, they could go to the theater, which was one of the only forms of entertainment in the 40s, really, the early 40s, radio and film, and they could go and see Frank Sinatra. They could turn on the radio at any time during the week and hear at least one, maybe two Frank Sinatra programs, and sometimes if he were guesting on another person's program, they could hear him 3 times a week. So really, radio and film brought him to the masses, and then of course, once television became a widespread medium, he really was able to get in there very quickly, and as you say, he started and hit the ground running.
He did, and when you look at the history of television, and especially the history of Italian Americans in television, the variety show is sort of the Italian American terrain. It's their terrain.
I never thought of that, but that's a great point.
And Frank Sinatra was the first one.
Well, you have Frank, and then later you have Perry Como.
Perry Como, almost 20 years on TV. And then, of course, Dean Martin.
Dean, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dean brought it to such a different level because of the slapstick comedy. I mean, it's a moment that's in almost every compilation of Frank Sinatra film clips or television clips, but that moment where they slide down the fireman's pole is just so funny. I mean, it's hysterical, And when you compare it to today, the values and the things that the simpler things that people were entertained by is so different than today. And I think there's a real beauty in that.
Yeah.
And the simplicity of listening to Frank Sinatra with just a guitar, as opposed to, 500 instruments that are, overdubbed 10 times.
Or a synthesizer.
Synthesized, right. It's,
exactly.
There's a beauty in that.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the films. The acting was very direct, very simple. It wasn't contrived. I mean, we could talk about Frank Sinatra as an actor for a half hour, because here was this guy who never took music lessons and is this phenomenal vocal artist, was such a natural actor. And I think it stems not just from that innate creative sense that he had, but it also, the acting stemmed from the music, because really what he was trying to do lyrically, whether he was doing a recording or a radio show, is communicate with just his voice. And he was able to do that so beautifully. And I think once he started really work in the film industry, he realized very quickly that his vocal artistry could transfer, those skills could transfer over to the acting end. And he was wonderful.
The word that is often used to describe Sinatra's singing or his prowess, people say, no one interprets better than Sinatra. Right. And they're talking about his singing, right?
Yes.
Now, that can be a term that is sometimes used in acting, whatever.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
But in singing, it's really wonderful.
He just had this amazingly natural, innate, communicative sense. I mean, he could express more by hunching his shoulders or turning and just turning his head a certain way. Even drawing back from the microphone. I mean, these are all gestures that communicate, and he could do that vocally. And, it was a matter of dynamics. Do I approach this with a soft start? Do I approach it with a hard start? Do I go sotto voce and bring my voice very low for drama and effect? And he just was a master. He just got it. I mean, really was unusual back then.
Let's talk about Frank Sinatra, for lack of a better term, the social activist.
Wow.
He was engaged socially.
Absolutely.
Of course, some of the famous pieces, The House I Live In.
Yes.
Right. The 1945 11-minute film.
Academy Award winner.
Academy Award winner, right. And there's a wonderful interview with him and Edward R. Murrow in which he speaks about being a 2-time Academy Award winner, but this is the one that means something to him. Yeah.
One is something that happened in 1946. It's an award. It was a special award given to Frank Ross who produced it, and Mervyn LeRoy directed it, and to myself. We did a short called The House I Live In, and the Academy bestowed a special award on all three of us. And of course, I'm very proud of this, too.
Listening to a lot of the old radio programs for a project that I'm working on, Frank makes many references to Franklin Roosevelt. And it's really neat because he always describes FDR as his friend, our president, and a wonderful friend, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he really believed in what Roosevelt was doing, and he supported him. I mean, he met Roosevelt, and I think that was a big impetus for him taking this very strong stand on social issues. And specifically in the 1940s, early 1940s, it wasn't just racial, it was also religious freedom.
Right.
So, here we are embroiled in this war in which Jewish people are being persecuted, and Frank recognized that. So the house I live in was really the perfect vehicle for him and a natural extension of the very compassionate and giving side of Frank Sinatra. And that was something that, he's a complicated guy. I mean, I think any artist that has that level of brilliance is complicated. They're complex. There's a lot of different dimensions. And sometimes there's dichotomies. So, we all have heard the negative stories about Frank Sinatra, but at his core and at his heart, he was a very good human being, a decent human being who cared about others. I think he was pretty modest in terms of, his fame and the image that he projected. But in terms of what he did for other people, and it starts in the 40s with publicly saying, this is how we need to treat each other, with kindness, with civility. And the house I live in really, bespoke those values that he really believed in, that he grew up with.
He's speaking to a bunch of young boys. They're very much the Bowery Boys, which was big time.
That's exactly what they
Not
remind me of.
the same actors, but
Right,
they're basically
right.
the Bowery
They
Boys.
basically are the Bowery Boys, right.
So he's speaking to
Right.
the sort of first generation of immigrants, working class.
What's he got, smallpox or something?
We don't like his religion.
His religion?
Look, mister, he's a dirt...
Now, hold on. I see what you mean. You must be a bunch of those Nazi werewolves I've been reading about.
Mister, are you screwy?
Not me. I'm an American.
Well, what do you think we are?
Nazis?
Don't call me a Nazi. My father's a sergeant in the army. He been wounded even.
Wounded, huh?
It's a very interesting piece of work,
Yeah.
and completely deserving of the Academy Award, and it's still something that people can relate to today. Frank continued that legacy of giving throughout his life. I personally heard the stories from the man who wrote the checks, his business manager, Sonny Golden, who we lost this last year or so. Sonny said, I was the guy who would get the call, and he would say to me, I'm in Spokane, and there's a family that lost their home in a fire, and I want you to send them $10,000. Don't tell them who it is. And Sonny would write the check and have it delivered. And he said that was almost every week. It was countless times. And all under this anonymous cloak. He really didn't want people knowing that he did that. At the same time, he was very open and public about raising money for big charities, whether it was muscular dystrophy or building a wing at the hospital in Palm Springs named after his dad, or raising money on his world tour to build a hospital wing in Israel. I mean, he was everything to all people, I think, in so many ways.
And he was recognized by Congress for that. There was
Yes.
an act of Congress
Absolutely.
that recognized him for his altruism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And utterly deserving and satisfying thing that he could see in his lifetime was this wonderful outpouring and acknowledgement of his altruism and his generosity.
So let's get back and talk about some of the work you're doing, because we're going to get more Sinatra from you.
Okay.
You're working on 2 projects. You're working on a book.
Working
and
on a new book,
a
yeah.
new book on Sinatra, and
Yes.
you're also working on a box set.
I am, and this is a project that I'm really excited about. One of the people involved in the project pulled a file at Sony and reminded me that this project started in 1994. So we have been working on this for about 22 years in one form or another, and it's finally coming to fruition for the 100th birthday. It's called Frank Sinatra, A Voice on Air, and we're saying that it's 100 tracks for 100 years. And this is a collection of rare recordings from his radio years, 1935 to roughly 1955. And those were really Frank's formative years. They were the years when he was omnipresent on radio. He was on the radio at least 2 times a week everywhere in the world. I mean, he was broadcast to Latin America and other countries. So we really have an amazing treasure trove of material to dip into. And a lot of these songs that we're presenting on the box set, almost 98% of them, are songs that Frank never sang again or never recorded. So it's really like the last untapped reserve of unreleased Sinatra material.
Yeah.
So we wanted to give a good overview of what radio was like, what Sinatra sounded like, you know, and how his voice and delivery of his vocals evolved over 20 years.
And when is that to be released?
Early November, first or second week in November.
Great.
Sony Music, Legacy Recordings. It's going to be wonderful. Any Sinatra fan, anyone who loves the American Songbook is going to love this package.
Great. You know, Frank Sinatra was hanging out with Dean Martin. Of course, Jerry Vecchi, all these Italian Americans, Julius LaRose, Al Martino, right?
Right.
But is it true that Frank Sinatra never, ever sang an Italian song, a song in Italian, or never recorded?
Not true.
Okay, all right, because there's this sort of legend, myth, you know, urban legend out there that...
That's not true.
All right.
I had produced a box set for Warner Brothers years ago called Frank Sinatra in Hollywood. And I like to say in interviews back then, this is the only place where you're going to find Frank Sinatra singing in Italian, in Polish, and in Russian.
Oh my God.
Because in his films, you know, he sang an aria with Catherine Grayson in 1947.
La ci darem la mano, la mi dirai di sì.
And it happened in Brooklyn. He sang a little snippet of a Russian song, folk song.
Epi krasnia.
Kaka bluey vas.
Kaka bluey vas.
Yeah. Kaka bluey vas.
Kaklu bluey vas. Kak bayuz vas.
In a film called The Miracle of the Bells, which is a great film. I know that it's hard to envision Frank Sinatra playing a priest, but he plays a priest, and it's a very poor parish that he represents, and he sings a song in Polish. So we do have Frank Sinatra singing in Italian.
Okay.
He sang O Solo Mio on the radio. He sang Come Back to Sorrento in English and Italian in the same song for Columbia Records. He sang a song called The Island of Stromboli.
Okay.
Also in the late 40s at Columbia, and he sings in Italian. I Have But One Heart.
Yeah.
He sings that in Italian. That's was a hit for him on Columbia. So we do have these samples.
So we can debunk that myth.
Yes, we can debunk that myth. But unlike Jerry Vale and a lot of the Al Martino, the Italian singers, he didn't do, or Jimmy Roselli, who was a fellow Hobokenite, who was like the patron saint next to Frank of the Italian-American community when I was growing up. But, you know, essentially Frank did record some things in Italian, and they are out there. But he never recorded a full album where he only sang Italian, a la Jerry Vale.
Okay.
But
no, because, you know, we have these other artists that we mentioned, and also, of course, Louis Prima.
Well, now it's a whole different, Louis Prima is a whole different bag of nuts.
Who actually took jazz and Italian, whatever.
he combined a lot of different genres.
So let's get to your new book project on Sinatra.
Well, you know, I was thinking about what I could do, what I could contribute for the 100th birthday that, you know, would be meaningful in terms of writing about the music. And unlike my book Sessions with Sinatra, which is a study of how he made his recordings, what I'm doing in this book, which is tentatively titled The Ultimate Listening Guide, I'm detailing the reasons why you should listen to the music and what you should listen for. So, you know, I think it kind of complements Sessions with Sinatra, where we learn the whole process and how he approached a recording session. And in this book, I'm really going to talk about this is what you want to listen for. This is how you build a Sinatra library. And I was thinking, you know, so many people say to me, what was it that made Sinatra so great? Like, what set him apart? Why does everybody love him and after all this time revere his work? This book is going to explain why. And it's going to do it in a fun way, so that if you're a casual music person and you just want to get Sinatra, you could pick it up and you can skim through it and, oh, this In the Wee Small Hours. Oh, I didn't know this about this record. Boom, boom, boom. And, you know, it's not going to be you know, a terribly technical book, but it'll be an interesting and fun book.
And where are you with that?
I'm still in the early
still
stages.
Writing? Yeah,
I'm still writing. I mean, I'm working on several other books at the same time. One of the books that I'm really proud of, which hopefully will be finished in a few months, is a memoir that I'm writing with the Grammy-winning, Oscar-winning film composer, songwriter, and producer Johnny Mandel. Johnny wrote The Shadow of Your Smile, which he won an Academy Award for. He wrote the song Emily, which Frank Sinatra recorded twice. He wrote Close Enough for Love, so many great standards. And he has produced albums and arranged for Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra, Barbra Streisand, Joe Stafford. I mean, the list just goes on. And Johnny and I are sitting, he's 89 years young, and we've been sitting for the last year and a half really talking about his life and his work. And Frank Sinatra is a very big part of it.
And we should not leave without mentioning that your sort of daily activities are with Seriously Sinatra.
I have to tell you, man, I am one of the luckiest guys in the world, and I'm really grateful. I'm very close to Nancy Sinatra, Frank's daughter, close to his first wife, Nancy, too, who is a wonderful lady, 98 years old. Wonderful, wonderful lady. Nancy Jr. and I have worked together on many things over the last 23 years, but particularly the last 7 or 8 years, we've worked together on her radio show, 3 hours each week. It's a 3-hour show. It airs each week on Sirius-XM, Seriously Sinatra, and I produce her show with her. So
great.
It's been a great ride, and I love this family. I love Frank Sinatra. It's been a real treat for me, a kid from Jersey, who never imagined that, you know, one day he'd be sitting down and you know, be friends with and talk with Frank Sinatra's family. And Phil Ramone, great producer who I wrote a book with, and you know, all the idols of my youth, you know, musical idols. So it's been great. I've been very lucky.
Well, listen, it's been great having you on Italics.
Thank you.
The exhibit is on till September 4th. From the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, I'm Lucia Grillo.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Italics. Catch up on previous editions of Italics at cuny.tv/show/Italics, and additional digital programming on our Italics YouTube channel, Italics TV. Tune in to our next episode airing September 30th. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.